by the final version, the signal had gone away. There is a major undisclosed conflict of interest. Stratton was working for GlaxoSmithKline when the study was published. There is a lack of transparency. Data access is limited. A father-son team of researchers, the Geyers, were once given temporary, highly restricted access to the VSD dataset. Access by independent reviewers is now blocked by the CDC. You can read about this in the book Evidence of Harm, or watch a YouTube video in which the Geyers describe their experiences. It is very troubling that we have a rich database that we have paid for to which access is denied. The Madsen study, this one looked at what happened after thimerosal was discontinued in Denmark in 1992. They reported an increase in autism when thimerosal was stopped. Big problems. More than 9 of 10 cases of autism are followed as outpatients only, and these weren't included, only the inpatients were counted during the time mercury was in the vaccines, but outpatients were added after it was discontinued. So only picking up less than 10% of the cases in the medical system when using thimerosal as compared to the majority of cases after it was discontinued completely invalidates their conclusion. This is another Danish study, and there are multiple problems with it. The study used person years of follow-up rather than actual prevalence of cases of autism, and it included children too young to have been diagnosed. It showed that mercury is beneficial, which is contrary to known science. But the biggest problem with the study is this one. 10 to 25% of cases of autism are lost from the records each year. Older children are the ones who receive the thimerosal, so the attrition will reduce the numbers in this group. To avoid this problem, they could have looked at the same age range data for each group, and for the 5 to 9-year-old children from 1992, when all received thimerosal, there was a higher autism rate as compared to the 5 to 9-year-old children born later and not exposed. The researchers worked for a vaccine manufacturer, so big problems with this study. The Stare Green also has big problems. It reviewed data from California, Denmark, and Sweden. Autism rates continued to climb in California with increased thimerosal, but it was claimed that autism also increased in Denmark and Sweden after the removal of thimerosal. Therefore, the rise must be due to something else. The cleanest data is from California that did show a rise in autism with thimerosal use. The Danish data is highly suspect, as we discussed, as is the data from Sweden. Andrews, this is a British study. They claim no relationship between the age of thimerosal exposure and neurodevelopmental disorders. Once again, multiple problems. There's a lack of transparency. The authors did not release the raw data and have declined to make it available. The study used unjustified statistics. One reviewer with expertise in statistics commented that the multiple regression analysis they used was unnecessary and included a time variable that dampened any effect from the exposure variable. And he commented that this should not have been accepted in the peer review process. A detailed critique of the statistics and more is presented in the article referenced here. There are other problems, including undisclosed conflicts of interest, so bad statistics, lack of transparency, and conflicts of interest. The Price study, this one also used the VSD database, a case-controlled study from 3 managed care organizations, and they concluded that vaccines are not related to the risk of autism, but there is overmatching. The thimerosal exposure was almost identical between the study group and the controls. The selection criteria may have screened out the most severe cases of autism. And this is a CDC-supported study. The second author is William Thompson, who is the current CDC whistleblower, now claiming malfeasance with CDC studies. And very worrisome was the background data, as analyzed by Brian Hooker, prenatal exposure to thimerosal was associated with increased autism. Should parents be concerned about thimerosal? The CDC says no. There are similar problems for the MMR autism studies. One of these is by the same author of a study we've just discussed. This study claimed that vaccinated children had lower rates of autism. Once again, there are big problems with this study. Many children included were too young to have had the MMR or to have been diagnosed. But the big problem with this study is the fact that all children developing autism before vaccination were placed in the unvaccinated group, even if they had been vaccinated, and this wrongly increased the autism in the unvaccinated group and wrongly decreased the autism in the vaccinated group. If they had removed the early diagnosed children from both groups, the vaccinated group had more autism. Once again, person years were used rather than prevalence by birth group. And if one looks at the children aged 5 to 9, the data show that autism increased after the MMR, and the actual rate of autism for the population was higher in the vaccinated group. The bottom line is that there are very serious flaws in the studies that claim to prove that thimerosal and that the MMR are safe. The vaccine court. The U.S. government, through the so-called vaccine court, does recognize and compensate vaccine injury. In 1986, Congress enacted the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, creating the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, referred to as the Vaccine Court. It involves the Department of Health and Human Services, the Federal Claims Court, and the Department of Justice. An individual claiming a vaccine-related injury files a petition with the court. The case is presented before a special master who makes the decision for or against compensation. The intent was to provide a quick, non-adversarial system, but it has become slow and adversarial. The realities of the vaccine court. Vaccine manufacturers can't be sued for vaccine injuries. It is referred to as a vaccine court, but it is an administrative procedure that can be arbitrary. Basic rules of law don't apply. There is no jury, no discovery process, so limited access to potentially incriminating documents. A special master presides and issues rulings. It is not an even playing field. You and your lawyer are up against the Department of Justice. The statute of limitations is only 3 years, so families may not be aware in time to access the court. Delays may be more than a decade, so a family has to have resources and stamina to persevere. There is no reliance on precedents. One special master may rule that vaccines cause autism, but other special masters may rule that they don't. It is not transparent. Hearings are off limits to the public and reporters, and determinations are often not made public. The vaccine court was being inundated by hundreds of autism cases that later grew to be about 5,000 families. To deal with these large numbers, the chief special master created the omnibus autism proceeding. The omnibus proceeding consisted of 6 test cases which determined the outcome for all 5,000 cases. Michelle Cedillo, Yates Hazelhurst, and Colton Snyder were the first 3 test cases chosen to test the theory that MMR vaccination plus mercury-containing vaccines could cause autism. Michelle Cedillo was the first case. She had been developing normally until she received the MMR at 15 months, and within days she had regressed to what would be diagnosed as severe autism with bowel disease. There are multiple concerns as to how this case was deliberated, and we'll discuss 4 of them. We'll discuss the opinion of an expert witness, the testimony of a British scientist, the involvement of a British reporter, and we'll discuss the denial of access to data and documents. For the omnibus proceeding, the court used neurologist Dr. Andrew Zimmerman's opinion that there was no connection between vaccination and autism. He was not called to testify, so no opportunity for Michelle's team to question him. The court did not reveal that his opinions were more complex and apparently evolved since the opinion used by the court had been written. Years before the hearing, he had examined Hannah Poling, noting that she developed features consistent with autism after vaccination, and Hannah Poling was to have been the fourth omnibus proceeding test case. He had noted that Hannah Poling's autism followed vaccination long before the case of Michelle Cedillo was heard, and he had explained how children with a mitochondrial defect could develop autism after vaccination, long before the omnibus cases were decided and appealed. The court did not evaluate the other children for a mitochondrial defect, which may itself be the result of vaccination and may be more common than generally appreciated. Hannah Poling, again, was to have been the fourth omnibus case, and it has been claimed that she was deliberately removed from the omnibus proceeding to keep Dr. Zimmerman's revised opinion out of the full omnibus proceeding. The opinion used in the case of Hannah Poling was placed under seal and kept secret. 3 days before the Cedillo hearing, the court announced the Buston report would be used. British scientist Stephen Buston criticized the lab that had tested Michelle Cedillo's tissues for measles. The claimed problem with the lab actually did not apply to the test results for Michelle. She had tested strongly positive for persisting measles vaccine virus in her tissues. An objection was made at the late edition, and later the appeals court agreed it was unfair, but did not overturn the decision. It is not clear how the court learned of and obtained the report, and there is evidence that Merck lawyers assisted the Department of Justice in getting the report. In addition, a British reporter may have assisted the court. Brian Deere, and we will learn more about him later, was involved, and it is reported that he claimed on a website that he had supplied a key document on the O'Leary lab business, which the Department of Justice didn't seem to know about just before the hearing. And Brian Deere was involved in the prosecution of Dr. Andrew Wakefield. There are unanswered questions about Brian Deere's communications with the vaccine court and how the court learned of and obtained the Buston report, but the court has not responded to Freedom of Information Act requests. Michelle Cedillo's team was denied access to documents held by Merck and was denied access to the vaccine safety data link data, despite the court referring to studies using the vaccine safety data link data as evidence against her case. And 1 month after the Cedillo case was heard, another special master ruled to compensate Bailey Banks for a vaccine injury causing autism. Bailey Banks had been a healthy child